whirlwind 12 months is what's happened, which is great because, you know, the city needed it and we needed to see units absorb and inventory come off the market, and all of that has happened, which is terrific. And I think, you know, a lot of smart people got a lot of really good bargains at the end of 20 and into the early 21. And, you know, as the year progressed, obviously things firmed up and negotiability reduced, but absorption has been incredible. I mean, you know, Laura will go through some of the numbers for you, but, you know, we absorbed a tremendous amount of units and closed a tremendous amount of units in 20 and 21, but the number of units that went into contract in 21 that either haven't yet closed is even greater. So, you know, it really shows an amazing progression of the marketplace from, you know, basically zero activity to, you know, hyper speed activity. Literally, the change occurred in a 3-month period. And not that we do a whole lot of market analysis on the rental side, but the rental market, I mean, you know, since the beginning of last year, completely turned around, which I think really helped fuel the sale market, frankly.
Yeah, they reflected themselves, exactly.
They did.
And it was all about people just coming back and feeling comfortable.
People coming back, feeling comfortable, jobs coming back. You know, unfortunately, you know, some natural disasters on the West Coast. I think a lot of the fires and some of the environmental issues that were going on in the West Coast and Midwest pushed a lot of people here to New York. Plus, as politically incorrect as it may sound, a tremendous amount of wealth was built in the last 24 to 30 months. And I was with a very smart, much smarter than I person that is a bigwig at Morgan Stanley a few weeks ago. And he said, you know, no one's really talking about check this number out, folks, $37 trillion of wealth that was built in the last 30 months.
I suspect we're going to talk about it today.
And a lot of that money is coming here. And we're seeing it with parents buying for their adult children, parents buying with their adult children. The jobs, you know, where I was just speaking to a developer. She graduated college. Her first job with Merrill Lynch was in 1999. She was making $55,000 a year, which for those of us who were in the job market back then, that was a lot of money. That same person today is coming into a job between $150,000 and $200,000 a year out of college.
Wow.
And they still can't afford what you're selling.
Well, actually, Laura will tell you they can afford it because some of the most active parts of the market aren't 4 million and up.
Right.
All right. Yeah. With that, let me start by saying, welcome to Boroughs and Burbs number 39. This is Stephen Kliegerman's second time on the show and Laura Tomana's first time on the show. But first, who is Stephen Kliegerman? Glad you asked. Let's say share screen. Boom. That's Stephen Kliegerman. He is president, Brown Harris Stevens Development Marketing. That means all the new apartment buildings and restored brownstones. I guess we're going to see some restored landmarks. I don't know about brownstones. And with him, Laura Tomana, vice president of research and market analytics at Brown Harris Stevens, formerly an economist at the Real Estate Board of New York, right?
Yep, you got it.
All right, wow. We'll get that right. We're going to look at things like 393 West End. We're going to look at Vandewater. We're going to talk about New York View and 200 Amsterdam. This is the kind of product that we're talking about. So I just figured I would give a quick overview. And with that, I want to also introduce my partner in New York, Roberto Pereira.
How are you, everybody? Thank you for coming.
Roberto and I met because I get his market report on what's going on in New York every month. It's my favorite snapshot of the New York real estate market. And we look at Stephen and Laura to give us a subset of that report on the new development. And that's why we're here today. So with that, what I've heard for the last couple minutes for anybody who joined us 5 minutes ago, Stephen's been talking about the dramatic change in the market in a little over a year.
Yeah. So Laura, why don't you give everyone some highlights and some stats and do what you do so amazingly well. We've been really fortunate to have Laura join us in the last year. She's been a tremendous asset to our organization and a pleasure to work with. So I'm sure you'll all enjoy hearing what she has to say for a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was quite the introduction. Hi, everyone. John and Roberto, thank you so much for having me. You know, as Steve mentioned earlier, 2021 was really a record-breaking year. There were north of $8 billion in new development sales, which is almost 4 times as much as we saw in 2020. And that just includes units that went into contract. That doesn't include, you know, over 2,000 units that also closed within 2021 as well. You know, Steve also mentioned earlier, inventory has tightened. You know, we saw such a demand for new development inventory with the lack of good product coming to market. And with the wealth that was built over 2021 and buyers coming back to the city, you know, jobs coming back, you know, return to office coming back, mortgage rates remaining low through the most part of the year, and incentives, you know, still strong in the first quarter into the second quarter of the year. There was a ton of contract activity that is now closing pretty quickly. And, you know, in addition to over $8 billion in sale, which is just such a tremendous number, the average price of all of those units signed was over $4 million, close to $4.5 million, which is about 30% higher than we saw in 2020. So on a high level, that's really where we saw the market go through 2021. You know, it was a huge comeback from what happened, you know, when the market really essentially stalled, especially for new development. Construction stalled, you know, people were not purchasing new developments 12 to 18 months in advance of move-ins like they once were. You know, and then throughout the beginning of the year when construction picked up and buildings were more move-in ready and people were really excited to not only get back to New York, but come here from the West Coast. You know, Steve can attest to a lot of the buyer activity that we saw in terms of, you know, parents buying for their adult children. You know, we saw a lot of first-time buyers given the mortgage rates that I touched on earlier, and just a whole collaboration of factors that made this really the strongest year yet in new development.
Yeah. We also saw the return of the foreign buyer, particularly the Chinese buyer. It really about the middle to end of the second quarter, the Chinese buyers started to come back and scoop up apartments between $1 and $3 million at a pretty healthy pace, you know, which also helped fuel the marketplace as well. And, you know, one of the stats that Laura came up with in our fourth quarter report also is that even though the average price was still north of $4 million, about 72% of all transactions were still between $1 and $3 or $1 and $4 million. So, you know, the high end of the market pushes those averages up a lot because you get these 10, 20, 30, 40, $100 million sales. But if you look at the number of transactions, it was really the $1 to $3 million marketplace that really buoyed the activity in the marketplace. Even though every week after week, we saw, you know, the Olsen report with plus $4 million apartments selling at 30, 40, 50 a week, you know, it still made up a smaller percentage of the actual number of units sold. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at your business plan going forward, is what is still moving. And 2 bedrooms, which used to always lead the new development market, really came back strong in 21.
Right.
With regards to the foreigners, you said you've seen a lot of the Chinese buyers coming, but is it anywhere near where it was pre-pandemic? And also from a standpoint of all foreigners, like how much have they come back? 20%, 30%, 40%?
And why? And why are they suddenly coming back? Because New York isn't fully open. It's not because they got a job here, or are they educating their kids here, or are they parking money here and not actually physically coming? Why is the foreign buyer suddenly back in our market?
Well, I think they actually are parking money. I think there's a flight to quality. I think that, also you had a major economic, blow up in China, last year in their particularly in the real estate realm. So I think, the foreign buyer, particularly the Chinese buyer, is a very savvy buyer. So they saw a little weakness in the market and they wanted to take advantage of that. But plus it is a flight to quality. It's equity preservation. I would say that at least the foreign buyer has come back to a 50% of where it was pre-pandemic. It may be even a little bit higher. The difference is where they're coming from. We're seeing more Chinese, more Korea. We used to see a lot of Korean buyers years ago, and now we're seeing them again. We're not seeing as many South American buyers. I think a lot of them are going to South Florida still. And we're starting to see the European buyer come as well.
What about India?
It's really funny you asked that, because we had a call today actually with a group from India who we're hoping is going to be a finance partner for a new project that we're hoping to get off the ground this year. And I asked them specifically, why do I not see more buyers from India? There's so much wealth there. Roberto, we didn't practice this, folks. This is totally by chance. Okay. And I love when that happens. And so what they explained to me, and they were based in London, they're not even in India, is you think it's hard to get money out of China? It's just as hard to get money out of India, maybe more difficult.
Wow.
So what she had said is that she thinks we're going to start seeing more money coming out of India, because there's been, in the last couple of years, a lot more planning to shift money away and get it into the States. But she actually told me that getting money out of India is as challenging, if not more, than getting it out of China.
Wow.
Because I've always been amazed. It's such a huge marketplace. It's the second most populous country in the world, right? And we rarely see that wealth come here.
Right.
I understand why.
And I've read that the next wave, the next culture to really come is going to be India, but it hasn't materialized.
Exactly. And I think you're going to start to see it, but it sounds like they've had a plan more to do it. Just like families from India have been planning like for generations to get their money out. Like, and they put together 20 cousins. Like maybe that might be the other thing too, not to be stereotypical or anything, but you got, depends on how many family members you might have that can each get the maximum amount out of a country.
Right.
So that might have something to do with it too. But I've always been interested in why the Indian marketplace has not caught up more with New York. And now I have my answer. Although for some reason it seems to get to London.
Yeah, exactly. It does.
Yeah.
But there's a big culture there in London.
There is a huge culture there in London. There is. And again, the foreign buyer is laser focused on new. They don't want, first of all, of course they don't want a co-op, but they don't even want a used condo. They want shiny, brand new. They want the views. They want the finishes. They want the amenities. It is laser focused on brand spanking new. And the nice thing about it, because the rental market has been so competitive recently, is they're actually able to rent these apartments out and at least break even, and if not make a couple of bucks, which for them is fine, because they're not looking for big return. They're really looking for, long-term appreciation, or to have their family move into it at some point.
So do you think there's because there was actually, they couldn't come here at all. Is there pent-up demand where it's going to be an enormous wave?
In the foreign market or just in general?
In the foreign market.
I think we'll continue to see it grow back to the levels where we saw it in the past.
Okay.
The only thing that's going to slow that down, frankly, is that there aren't a lot of new projects coming out in the marketplace that are going to fill the $1 to $3 million price point, which is something that is going to constrain that ability for the investor to purchase. Most of the stuff that's in the pipeline is higher end or larger units. I think we're going to see a gap, which is probably going to see, great appreciation over the next couple of years in the lower end of the market.
You always said you guide your developers to make what there isn't.
That's right.
And so are you guiding your people? Look, you got to make the 2 million and below product.
You know, it really depends on where it is, but yes, like the client that we're talking about on the west side with this potential Indian investor, that would be like a $1 to $3 million product. We're talking to a client in the Gramercy area, also like a $1.5 to $3.5 million product. But if I'm building a tower, we're going to push the prices, because the one thing that this market has proven is views always outperform the market. They set a new standard in the market.
Really?
Yeah. I would just to add to that, I mean, Steve hit the nail on the head. The inventory that remains, and you know, one thing that we look at closely in new development that differs a bit with the resale market is shadow inventory. So shadow inventory is all the units that are left in these new developments that are not actively listed on the market. You don't see them on a listing service. They haven't been brought to market. And typically, you know, as we practice inventory control in these buildings, you know, lower price point, quicker absorption. And these larger, more expensive units tend to remain on the market longer. So although there's, you know, around 1,500 units actively marketed in new development, there's closer to 6,000 units in real inventory. So about 4,500 units that you're not seeing listed on the market that remain in these buildings to sell. And, you know, those typically have higher price points. In that void, you know, that Steve said, that 1 to 3 million, maybe that first or second purchaser who wants to live full-time in that apartment in New York, or potentially as an investment to rent it out, there's a major lack of product.
So that's a ratio of about 25% of the inventory is visible to the public, essentially. Is that ratio, is that what it was pre-COVID and what it generally tends to be?
Yeah, typically I would say it's, you know, even a bit less than 25%, you know, just looking at our full shadow numbers, it's actually, you know, closer to north of 5,000. And that's, you know, that's pretty standard. You know, no building is going to put all of their listings on the market at once. But then again, pre-pandemic, in really the last 5-6 years, there were a lot of mega towers built with, you know, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 square foot homes, you know, when the market was really strong, and, you know, then COVID hit and we're getting back to it. So there's a lot of, you know, what we call trophy units left on the market to move. And, you know, a lot that, you know, their floor plans that were designed, you know, these new developments take, you know, 3, 4, or 5 years to build. Floor plans that were designed for the buyer at the time, with this shift in our cultural movement and our work from home and kids being home more and in and out of the city, the layouts that were necessarily designed may not work anymore, which, you know, Steve and I and our team, we try to, you know, there's no crystal ball of what the future is, but we try to design these buildings so that they adapt to what people will need in the future. And we're seeing, you know, a lot of the product that's sitting on the market right now is, you know, either overpriced or the layouts just simply don't work for the demands of the buyer today.
The Zoom room, are we still building Zoom rooms, or is Zoom rooms so 2021?
Zoom rooms are in. We are still building Zoom rooms. Everyone needs privacy.
We're still building them. As a matter of fact, if anything, we're adding more. You know, at 200 Amsterdam, we have 2, and every time I go to that building, it's being used. The gym, hardly ever. The Zoom room, all the time.
That's amazing.
You know, the other thing that you should always note about inventory, right? So particularly when you're working with a buyer, you know, and they say, well, you know, I just read this article and there are 7,000 new development units in Manhattan. And I literally just had lunch with Melissa Birch, who's a developer. She's the head of development at Lend Lease. They're doing the Claremont across the street, actually, from Vanderwater. And we were comparing notes and talking. And the way that we, Brown Harris Stevens and Laura, and Robin Schneiderman, our director of business development, who works closely with Laura on our research, the way that we look at inventory is different than the way that our competitors look at inventory. We look at inventory based upon what's really coming to market. In other words, does it have financing? Does it have construction financing? You know, because if it's just an idea or there was an article about it, but they don't have financing, the chances are less than 50-50 that it's ever going to happen. So we were talking about what real inventory is. And so first of all, you have to distill what's in the news from what's really financed. But then you have to take a look at the couple of buildings in the city that are going to be around until like my grandchildren are going to college, right?
My grandchildren.
Mega buildings, like, no offense to the buildings, I'm not disparaging the buildings, but One Manhattan Square, 800 plus apartments. That thing's going to be on the market forever. So even though they've sold a lot, they still have like 400 plus apartments to sell. One Wall Street, 700 or so apartments. They have like 600 plus apartments to sell. Just those two buildings alone is 1,000 units.
Wow.
Yeah, and to Steve's point, it's how to keep the product fresh. That's a huge part of our job. That's a lot of units, it's a lot of years at sale. And bringing the research into the new development and what we're seeing in that inventory. You look at those numbers, and yeah, like Steve said, there's a few buildings out there that a new development can range from 6 units to 800 units. Right. And you look at the activity of some of these. One Manhattan Square is a great example. They had I think about 10 contracts last month. That's great, and for any building that would seem that's phenomenal for a standard size building, but it still takes a lot of 10 units a month to sell out that product.
Exactly. So it's just important when you're working with those buyers to really understand that, like, there's real inventory, and then there's inventory that's just a number on a page, right? It's the same thing, when you're looking at your resale business, right? There are real sellers out there, and then there's a seller out there that has a $4 million apartment that they're asking $8 million for, right? And if I get it, I'll sell it, but it's not really real inventory. So be really careful when you're working with a new development buyer and they tell you, that they think the market's weak because there's all this inventory out there, because there really is not. And when you talk about good inventory, it's even smaller.
So how is the good inventory, because construction slowed, stopped essentially. Are we going to be in a position like we were in 2013 where there's really?
I'm going to let Laura take the bulk of this, but yes, the answer is yes. We're going to see a gap in inventory. Right. And Laura, maybe you want to talk about what's in the pipeline that's, kind of the future.
Yeah, absolutely. In the pipeline, and, as Steve mentioned, we look at real pipeline, not just, land trades and buildings that have been talked about and buzzed about in the news, but buildings that are planned, they're filed, they're financed. It's just over about 2,000 units, which is not a lot. And that's coming to market over the next 4 or 5 years. And those buildings range from, it could be 10 units to a few hundred units. But yes, there will be a gap in approachable inventory. If you have thousands of buyers that want that $5 million plus market, it's out there. There is that shadow inventory that's waiting to sell. But, the price point that we discussed earlier, that $3 million and under sweet spot, there is a definite need for product at that price point. That, speaking to the resale market, that's right in that resale sweet spot. But these buyers, especially past pandemic and through the pandemic, are looking for that extra home office, that amenity space, that outdoor space, the views, and the new. That's the expectation that we see a lot of buyers have now. And that product got eaten up so quickly through 2020 and 2021 in new development.
So from a supply and demand perspective, that means prices are just going to skyrocket.
Prices should go up. The things that will constrain prices are continuing increases in real estate taxes. Although this past year we got a little lucky and taxes in many buildings actually stayed stable, came down a little bit, but they're going to go up in the future. Operating expenses are awful right now, right? Yeah. So you have to take a look at that, and interest rates are going up. So with interest rates going up, I think interest rates going up is going to have a negative, obviously, impact on that ability for the market to really push up, because for every 500 or 100 basis points, your buying power is going down. So I think we will see appreciation, Roberto, and I think that the constraining inventory will push prices up. But I think that if interest rates rise in correlation with that, we may just be kind of more of an equilibrium.
Sure. But hang on, let me just follow up on that. Sorry, John. But then it becomes about affordability.
That's right.
Right? Which is going to constrain the market.
It does. I mean, it's like I said, it's going to be a kind of a push me, pull me, right? You know,
yeah.
But then who knows? You know, we could have another event, hopefully positive event, that pushes more people to the for sale marketplace and buoys the market again, right? You know, so you know, it's a delicate dance right now between inventories, interest rates, total carrying costs, and also availability within your price point. You know, I mean, I get calls every day. It's amazing. Like even for $5 million, it's hard to find like a really good apartment on the Upper West Side right now. Right, Roberto?
I know.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah.
And, you know, to your point about, you know, the prices and, you know, there's a ceiling for what people will pay. You know, prices will appreciate and increase, but, you know, someone's budget, you know, they're not going to go $1 million over their budget for this $1 to $3 million sweet spot. You know, Steve and I are always amazed in the ultra luxury market, how people kind of just come up with another $500K, $1 million out of their back pockets for the ultra luxury. But for these smaller units and the 1 to 3 million, you know, you may be able to push 100,000, 150, but typically, you know, there is a definite ceiling of what people are willing to pay, especially if it's a first-time condo buyer in a new development.
Which the alternative means you have to rent, which is going to push the rental prices too.
Yes, it is. And, you know, incentives, not only in the rental buildings, in the condo buildings, the incentives are, you know, going down across the board. People were getting 2-3 months free through the pandemic, you know, incentives in the condo market. We were seeing, you know, almost 20% closing costs thrown in, transfer costs, and across the rental and condo market, those incentives are very quickly diminishing.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I actually was just, for 393 West End, John, I was just looking at rental rates of 3-bedroom apartments on the Upper West Side for our sponsor who was just interested in, like, you know, if someone wanted to buy this apartment and rent it out today, what would happen? First of all, you pretty much need either a co-op or condo sublet, because there are very few 3-bedroom apartments that are appropriately sized for the Upper West Sider. And the minimum price for a 3-bedroom between, what was it, 69th Street and 86th Street was like $11,000 a month. That was the minimum price for a 3-bedroom rental. It would range from $11,000 to $23,000.
Wow. So if
and by the way, that wasn't even like a high floor.
I think what I hear you talking about is 2 different markets, though. What I heard was the average price point was $4 million, but the bulk of the market, the bulk of the activity is $1 to $3 million. Yeah. And therefore, you've got some very expensive condos at the very high end that tend to make that average $4 million.
Right.
So I want to drill down a little bit more granularly, and because when you say that taxes, interest rates, and rising common charges are making less affordable, and that's going to impact the market, is that going to affect both markets? Are markets on the Upper West Side as price sensitive as the ones in Brooklyn? I mean, are you painting the entire market with one brush? Is the high end behaving the same as the 1 to 3 is behaving?
I would say no. I mean, Steve, if
go ahead, Laura. Go ahead. Talk about it.
I would say no. You know, the ultra luxury buyer, let's say, you know, 10 million and over, these monthly common charges, monthly taxes, a slight increase is not going to deter them nearly as much as it would a 1 to 3 million buyer, or, you know, the lower end of the new development market. You know, it's a different buyer, it's a different sensitivity. And when we talk about new development, there are some very, very different buildings. You know, the average new development dollar per foot right now is around $2,200 a foot. but some of these buildings go up to 6,000 a foot. Some enter the market around 1,800 a foot. 130 William is a great example downtown. They had great absorption at around 16, 17, 1,800 a foot. So, we're looking at averages, but the market covers, 16 to 8,000 a foot. Some of these units, some units go for 10,000 a foot, the penthouses and in the mega towers and Billionaires Row. So those buyers have a different sensitivity to interest rates and to monthly common charges and taxes than your buyers in the 4 and under, 5 and under market.
So are you advising your next client that he should be basically that there is a lack of inventory and there's a good opportunity at the high end of the market and at the low end of the market? There's opportunities throughout, or are there better opportunities in certain neighborhoods to make money and at certain price points?
I think there are still opportunities at the high end of the market, but it's very location specific. Where the middle market, there really is no low end of the marketplace anymore, is a little bit more free flowing and open to, kind of secondary markets. Not that the Lower East Side is a secondary market, but let's look what's going on in the Lower East Side right now. But also, think about it. Like when you talk about $1 to $3 million, for $1.5 million, you're talking about like a 650 square foot 1-bedroom apartment.
Right.
So that's still a pretty big number for a 651 square foot 1-bedroom apartment.
It really is. And it just a second, Steve, it really varies building by building, neighborhood by neighborhood, because your buyer changes. I love to look at the Gramercy up to Flatiron up to Nomad change over the last few years. A few years ago, no one was talking about Nomad. No one would want to live in Nomad, and now there are, a handful of new development luxury buildings in Nomad getting around 2,300 to 2,500 a foot, higher than a lot of these buildings that were on 2nd and 3rd Avenue in Gramercy about 4 or 5 years ago, whenever they entered the market. So, part of our job is, and why developers come to us to advise on these new developments, is what is happening in the neighborhood. And that's not necessarily just from a residential standpoint. What retail is coming in, what infrastructure is coming into that neighborhood, what schools, what natural amenities within the neighborhood. And that really drives our demographic of the buyer. And ultimately, our buyer demographic drives our recommendation for what to build.
I have a theory. In Connecticut, the fact COVID caused the commute to go from first or second most important thing to maybe like 8th on the list for a lot of people. And frankly, the way they commute, car versus train. Mm-hmm. So I have a theory that your Nomad example is at least in part because the old notions of commute and living where we work have gone away. And that's opened up new markets in Connecticut. Now people are willing to live in Easton, where they wouldn't many years, five years ago. Is that also true in Manhattan?
I think we're seeing both. There's two trends. There is the buyer who, a lot of people believe as of now that they will indefinitely work from home. So they're willing to live a bit further out or farther away from main transportation or walk to work, in order to potentially get more space for more money. Then we also have, I'm hearing, a big majority of people are still in flux. They're expected to be in the office 2-3 days a week. They're not expected to be in the office from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., but they may be expected to go in for a meeting and start their morning at home and go back in the afternoon. So we're also seeing people who do want to be within a walking distance of their main office. And then that also gets back to our whole amenity conversation of, being able to be at home, but be able to step outside your home within your building and feel as though you have privacy or somewhere to work or somewhere to go. So, I think we're still in a bit of a flux situation in Manhattan with where people are working, whether that's at home or in the office. Another thing that we're seeing, and I'm seeing this a ton, is people who were renting in the city, gave up their lease, bought homes upstate, bought homes out east, and now that was a big surge in some buyer activity the last half of this year. Now they are expected to be back in the city, and the inventory to be back in the city. And as you all know, the rental prices were absolutely crazy high the last half of the year. And it forces people to look into buying too. So I really think it touches three segments of the market in terms of where they're working and how people are working now.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of buyers like at View, John, which is one of the projects you mentioned that we're working on now. A lot of our buyers there are buying there not just because it's a great project, but because they want to be able to literally be a 10 to 15 minute walk to their place of work. The other thing that we saw and that continue to see during COVID is—
Wait, so location is driving the view?
Location is definitely driving the view. And View also has great proximity to NYU Hospital. The medical field has been a huge component of the resurgence in the for sale marketplace. The number of doctors, nurses, interns that are coming into the city for the medical field.
Hey, Stephen, medicine doesn't pay anymore. How does a doctor or a nurse afford your fabulous apartments at the View?
I'm telling you, there's a lot of wealth. There's a lot of wealth in this city, and it is, and parents are helping their adult children who are med students, or maybe they're their first or second year residency, and they know that they're going to be spending a lot of time at the hospital. They're making sure that they have a comfortable place to live.
Wow.
And the medical field, nurse practitioners and the like make a pretty good income. And like I said, I think they have a lot of wealthy families behind them.
What's a 2-bedroom at the View cost?
You can get into a small 980 square foot 2-bedroom for just around $2 million. 2 bedrooms go up to about $3 million, depending on what floor you're on.
And you're saying that's a perfect answer for a young doctor, $2 million apartment. 2 million,
yep. We have people coming in with a budget for a 1-bedroom between 1.2 and $2 million, and 2 bedrooms between about 2.1 and 3. Which 5, 6, 7 years ago we would have all scoffed at and said that's insane. And now it's the norm.
I see Curtis Jackson is on the call, and I'm wondering, and it makes me, he's the king of New Jersey, and I'm wondering, are they willing to go across the river, or are they you've been talking a lot about Manhattan, and I'm wondering, is Jersey City, is Curtis getting some of the love?
Yeah, I can take that one. There are a lot of buyers in Jersey City. You look across the river, you see tons of buildings going up. I've worked on a lot of buildings over in Jersey City over the last 10 years. And I've seen firsthand over the last decade, the shift from luxury rentals being built to luxury condos. You have 99 Hudson, 800 units. People, here's what I'll say. There's a difference between Jersey City and Brooklyn and Long Island City. Your Manhattan buyer most likely is going to go look to Brooklyn first. There's still, a bit of a stigma, I would say, of people going from Manhattan to Jersey City, even though that path commute, if you're downtown, 7 minutes door to door to Jersey City, and you can get beautiful views. The views from Jersey City into Manhattan are stunning, better than looking the other way. But we're not seeing a lot of our buyers look to Jersey City. If you're Manhattan, we do see them looking to Brooklyn and to Long Island City and Astoria.
Yeah. Very, very, very rarely do I see in my sales reports of this buyers also looking in Jersey City or Hoboken or Weehawken, but we see often, that they're looking in Brooklyn, Long Island City, or not that it's not Manhattan, but Upper Manhattan. But we don't get a lot of crossover with Jersey.
Steve, can we talk about forbearances. Last year at this point, it was a foregone conclusion that several people were probably going to go down, several buildings, projects, et cetera. HFZ being the number one on the map.
Yeah.
Has everybody else, for the most part, survived, like the Hayworth and all these places?
So the Hayworth is changing hands. That deal will be done soon, and will most likely come back as a condominium. The Central somehow made it out by the skin of its teeth, and it's the same developer, but they were further along and probably had a little bit more reasonably priced product as well. So the Central survived. The Hayworth is changing hands. The XI, as we all know, is changing hands. 100 East 53rd Street, which we, Brown Harris Stevens, are about to relaunch, kind of changed hands. It went from one partner to the other partner. A.B. Rosen got taken out by Vanke. So those are being reinvented, and 100 East 53rd Street's prices are being drastically changed in a positive direction for buyers. But you still have some others. 125 Greenwich is still out there and kind of floating around. But for the most part, forbearances were staved off, mostly because the banks didn't want to take back the asset.
Right.
You know, so some of the failures that we had thought were going to come, just because the banks had no appetite for the asset, they got staved off. Which was frankly good for the marketplace, because, you know, you don't want that. But, you know, a lot of deals got restructured. So the Hayworth basically is a restructure with someone new coming in, right? 125 Greenwich will be a restructure with someone new coming in. What we're not seeing is a lot of these buildings go the rental route. You know, they still don't really make sense on a rental pro forma. So
were any of them reconceived? Like they were poorly designed units and they really had to go in and actually make changes?
No, most of them weren't kind of torn apart. It's more just dropping the basis so you can sell them at a reasonable price. Yeah. Because to start tearing them apart and reconfiguring them, you know, it's a nightmare. And not only is it a nightmare because it's time and money, but like no one puts wood floors down throughout the apartment, right? So if you have a wall, now you have a gap. So now you either have to put all new floors down or fill the floors, and the floors never look right, you know, and a lot of them just didn't work. So it's really just repricing, rebranding, and trying to reposition the product for the market today.
Okay, so now you're working with a new client. How do you pro forma the next 2 or 3 years out based upon where we are? Like, what are you telling them?
Well, I mean, and Laura, feel free to jump in. I mean, first of all, we're looking at the pipeline, right? What's coming? So what's the competitive set look like so that we know what our competition will be, right? We're looking at pricing trends in the marketplace, and we're looking at what has performed well in the recent market as well. But really what we're looking for is holes. So if we see that the pipeline is all, you know, larger 3 and 4 bedroom units, then we're going to be looking towards the 1s and 2s. You know, but again, it's location specific as well. You know, if I'm on the Upper West Side, no matter what happens, I'm probably not building a lot of studios and 1 bedrooms.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Steve said. When we look at pipeline, we don't just look at, you know, what building, what block is coming on. We want to dive deep into their floor plans, into their unit sizes, you know, further than even just looking at, you know, is it studios, 1s, 2s, 3s? We look at the sizes of those units too. You know, we don't want a market flooded with all 700 square foot 1 bedrooms. We want to differentiate ourselves, build flex spaces, you know, have outdoor space where we can. So really looking at what performed well, and, you know, really who is your buyer? You know, it's very easy to, you know, look at a floor plate and squeeze in some floor plans and square footages, but how is someone actually going to live in that home? Yeah. If it is a family, their kitchen is going to be very different than, you know, a new couple. They may both be buying a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, but we want to look at who's buying there, and then how do we size those units and design them and price them accordingly to, you know, who the demographic makeup of our building will be. And that again bleeds directly into our amenities and also the interior design of the buildings as well.
Yeah, and like, you know, especially in like living rooms and dining areas, right? I mean, the demand for more space in a living room for, you know, for whatever reason, maybe it's because you need to live and work at home, or, you know, you have a family and your family has grown, your children might be getting older, or now you're in a new phase of your life and you're empty nesters, but now you're expecting the mishbucha to come over one day. You know, we're finding that buyers, particularly in New York City, always seem to find that extra couple of $100,000 to get a little bit more room. So, you know, typically we set guidelines for sizes of studios, 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom apartments, and for each room. Our living rooms are growing because the amount of space that people want for circulation is more. So like we used to say we wanted a minimum of a 23-foot living room for a 3-bedroom. Now I need 25 to 30 feet.
I asked about New Jersey, and you said the Manhattan buyer is not willing to go to New Jersey. It's kind of what I heard, the typical one.
Typically.
But I looked at your market report and read it, and Brooklyn is like going crazy. And you see this Vandewater, that's not exactly in Manhattan. That's Morningside Heights, right?
Morningside Heights is Manhattan.
That's Manhattan.
anyone who went to Columbia University.
Look how far away Manhattan is.
That's very Manhattan.
It's like Canada.
You know, there's, to your point, you know, Steve and I, you know, we're working on something in Inwood right now. You know, people are looking, you know, north of Vandewater, further out, Mott Haven, Inwood, you know, farther out in Queens. So the buyer may not necessarily be going to Jersey. You know, the Manhattan buyer, the Jersey market is still very strong, but the Manhattan buyer is specifically looking, you know, more north or more into Queens. And then, you know, farther areas in Brooklyn, like Gowanus. Gowanus has a ton in the pipeline, a ton in the works. And, you know, 5 years ago, that was not the case. You know, we saw that happen with Bushwick a few years ago. We saw it happen with Greenpoint. We saw it happen with Long Island City starting about 10 years ago. And, you know, you have to keep building out, and people are willing to pay, you know, these previous Manhattan prices to be further out of Manhattan.
And you're right, by the way, Brooklyn has been also a real bright spot in the marketplace for the last actually 18 months. Brooklyn, even in the heat of COVID, was still doing pretty well. Some people were fleeing to Brooklyn for a little bit more space, you know, a little bit more convenience, because you've got all the different neighborhoods, 48, you know, different neighborhoods.
Is it limited to just Brooklyn with a view, or like primo Brooklyn, or all of Brooklyn has been hot?
I mean, pretty much all of Brooklyn, because even Eastern Brooklyn now, like all the way out, you know, to Rockaway is actually doing well. Different demographics of buyers, much different demographics of buyers, yeah. But Brooklyn in general is just doing really, really well. And the absorption in Brooklyn has been tremendous. You know, there are a couple of big buildings, obviously, like 11 Hoyt, that absorbed a lot of units. Our project at 10 Nevins absorbed a lot of units. And now even like there's a development in Dumbo called the Olympia that has like starting prices in the low 2000s a square foot, I believe. And it's even selling well. And like, you know, that price point in Brooklyn is a price point that really was reserved for the top of a building or a unit with amazing outdoor space, you know, or like the heart of Brooklyn Heights. And they're doing really well. So Brooklyn is certainly not an emerging market. Brooklyn is a very stable and growing market.
Gowanus is emerging.
Gowanus is emerging because of the rezoning. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount going on there. Laura just did a huge report on Gowanus.
Yeah, Gowanus is definitely emerging. You know, now is, you know, speaking of places to look, you know, to buy, investor clients, or, you know, get in early, Gowanus for sure. And, you know, just back to Steve's point about Brooklyn, and just a huge trend that we've been seeing in buyers is outdoor space. And, you know, these Brooklyn new developments over the last few years had more units with private outdoor space than your typical Manhattan new development. And we're seeing such a demand. You know, we just did a study a couple of days ago on the January contract activity for new developments in Manhattan, and over 26% of the contracts for the month had private outdoor space, whether that's a small Juliet balcony to a private terrace. So there's so much demand for that. And there's currently not a lot of product in Manhattan with approachable outdoor space, but these Brooklyn new developments have, great opportunity for that buyer.
A year ago, you were very bullish on New York. New York is back, and you should be building and you should be buying because, and you were right. And you started the show and you explained that the single biggest reason for that is that there's $667 trillion sloshing around. Is that what you said?
There was about $37 trillion of new wealth created in the last 24 to 30 months.
Bitcoin, stock market,
mostly stock market. I would assume a lot of it's in Bitcoin as well, but I think most of it's more traditional. We get asked all the time, like, are you seeing buyers buying with Bitcoin? I mean, those deals do happen, but they're few and far between. Developers take enough risk building a building and taking on the debt that they take on. They don't need the arbitrage risk of, having their Bitcoin go up and down 10 and 20% every day.
So Bitcoin aside, there's all this money, all this wealth in the market. You're still bullish when you're looking 5 and 7 years out? Because when I talk to Scott Hobbs, and I'm going to ask him to unmute right now, he says, oh yeah, the party's going to be good. We're building great big houses for great big wealthy customers, and we are feeling good about the next couple of years. But when does the party end, Steve, Laura, Scott? When does the party end? When are we going to pay the bill?
I mean, I don't know. My crystal ball is a little hazy right now because everything's a little bit off. We've got a potential war in Eastern Europe. We've got a government that no matter what side of the coin you're on is just can't get anything done properly. My feeling is that if government just kind of stays out of things and just does nothing and things calm down in Eastern Europe, we have a good road ahead because we're recovering, right? So things should continue to flourish and inflation's going to relax. I mean, this is a moment in time. Inflation's going to relax once, we're already seeing, I don't know about all you, but like I was hearing about a friend every single day or a coworker that had COVID. I haven't had that report in 2 weeks. I haven't had one friend report getting COVID in 2 weeks now. Okay, that's huge. So if we can keep on leveling this curve, getting things under control, eventually supply chains will free up. And I think we have good economic times ahead because of all that.
For how long? Because you're advising
you're always going to hit a cycle. I mean, I think COVID in some ways created a weird cycle, much like, again, not to sound morbid, but much like 9/11 did. For those of us that were around during 9/11, we were heading into a dark place financially in the summer of 11, okay? In the summer of 2000. And we skipped a cycle. I think COVID created a different cycle. So I think normally we run in 5 to 7 year cycles, Scott. I think we probably just created that 5-year cycle. So I think we've got a good 5 years ahead of us, actually. And, our population keeps growing. Unfortunately, the West Coast environmental issues are not going to get better. They're only going to get worse, unfortunately. The East Coast is reasonably stable when it comes to that. At least we don't have wildfires every 6 months. And I think the Northeast is going to continue to see, positive moves in the economy and in housing for at least the next 5 years.
Laura?
Yeah, I agree. My whole feeling that whole time when you asked the question and Steve was talking was, New Yorkers are resilient. New York's resilient. We've backed, we've come back after 9/11, through this pandemic. There's no market like Manhattan. There's nowhere to live like Manhattan. There's nowhere to work like Manhattan. So although I think, the outer boroughs and, upstate New York and out east and Connecticut are also going to thrive, I only see New York continuing to thrive and, going through the typical cycles that our economy faces and the challenges and, the unpredictability that we face. But each and every time the New York real estate market has bounced back.
Yeah. And John, you know, I've got developers right now. They're not only looking New York, but they are looking at Connecticut. Like they're looking at Bridgeport. They're looking at New Haven. They're seeing that these areas are changing and that they are desperate for housing. And you know, that's a good sign. When my developers are saying like, I want to branch out to Connecticut, I want to branch out to other areas, it means that they see positive things coming down in the future for the economy and for the real estate market.
Yeah. Connecticut is closed. We have no room. They're all going to come right back. They're going to come right back.
I'll see you this weekend.
What do you mean you have no listings? You need product.
You need product, but we got nothing to sell them right now. Stop. When's the party end?
Like how much inventory do you have in your markets right now? Like almost nothing.
Yeah, almost nothing. It's never been this tight. And honestly, and I put this in my market report, and it's not cool for me to say this out loud, but I'm going to say it. What you're seeing is agents are holding listings as pocket listings. So you've got a problem with too little inventory to begin with. Mm-hmm. That is exacerbated by the fact that agents are holding them close to keep a competitive advantage. So what was a 40% decrease in listings has now become a 60, 70% decrease in listings. And it's getting, you know, and one way to solve that is through the MLS cracking down on the practice, but that's not happening right now. So you have to call agent by agent by agent and ask them about shadow inventory, which is why I was fascinated when you talked about shadow inventory. Really only 25% of what's available is on the market in your world. And I thought, wow, that's kind of what's happening in my world too.
Yeah. The only difference is, at least in our world, we know where the shadow inventory is. It's just not released. You know, at least we can find it. You know, it's on a schedule someplace. It's just not right in front of us.
Scott Hobbs, didn't you say that the chief economists are predicting that the cycle ends in 5 years? Are we looking at 2027?
I think in following Institute Trend Research and some other economists, I mean, we're going to have some sort of a recession in the next 3, 4, 5 years. I think there's a huge just backlog right now. That recession should be relatively minor. And then around 2030, that's when kind of the bills start coming due. And again, for who and in what part of the economy, who knows? But, you know, again, we're over 30 trillion in debt, the interest rates, the inflation, everything other stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on. 2030, but until then, let's have some fun.
Yeah, so like I said, 5 to 7 years. I agree. You know,
what do economists know anyway?
I love you, Greg.
Greg, what does your crystal ball say?
You're wrong about inflation. Supply chains can be worked out. When you pumped 40% more money into people's pockets, inflation is going to be here for years. It's not going to be over in 6 months to a year. It's going to be an ongoing problem. The Fed has really been guilty of malpractice during this whole cycle, continuing to print money, not even thinking of the consequence. So I'm a little worried about more long-term inflation. But
okay.
Go ahead, Steve. What were you saying?
No, I said okay.
From a standpoint of the intensity of the inflation, I mean, we're at 7, 8 or whatever. Do you feel that it'll be down to 4?
It's hard to put a number on it because the Fed's going to begin tightening in March. They're already tapering their bond purchases, which means stocks are going to be volatile. Because the last thing the stock market wants to see is an alternative to the stock market. They want bond yields as low as possible, so people put all their money in stocks. I think the problem is that we have a Fed that has their head in the sand, that's being asked to do too many jobs. And if they start hiking 25 basis points a meeting 3 or 4 times this year, or maybe even 5, that's not going to be quick enough to stop this. So 7% year over year inflation is something we haven't seen in 40 years. And when the average person's pay is going up about 5%, you can see where the math doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get that growth in consumer spending, which accounts for 70% of GDP. A lot of people are looking potentially for a negative GDP growth in the first quarter of this year for that reason. and the fact that companies can't find enough workers, that's another problem. So the economy has issues. I think it's going to be okay for the next couple of years, but I do think if the government continues to want to print money and pass stimulus plans that the economy doesn't need, I think inflation is the biggest problem we have. We have almost 10.5 million jobs available in the United States. So, we have companies hurting for workers. We need to address that so the economy can grow at potential. Be interested in the jobs report Friday. We'll see what the jobs report says tomorrow. The ADP numbers were negative, so we'll see what the BLS numbers for job growth in January look like. Could be a disaster.
So Greg, is holding a physical asset like real estate a good move in an inflationary environment?
Of course it is. It's always a good move to hold real estate. Yeah, I mean, conceivably the price will go up, especially if it's an income-producing property, because rents will go up with everything else. And I think as the stock market gets more volatile, which we've certainly seen in the last couple of weeks, last week was the first positive week stocks have had this year. And we were looking for a January bounce. I mean, remember the January effect. January is typically the best month for stocks, but January was not a good month for stocks this year. So I think people will be looking. I think the foreign investor coming back is great for us because we have an asset that will do well in an inflationary environment. They don't care as much about interest rates because they want to pay cash. I think that is certainly a good alternative.
Are they sensitive to the strength of the dollar?
I don't think they're thinking about it. I think they see the safety in the dollar. I mean, it's not like we're the only country with issues. Inflation is multi-decade highs in Europe as well. It's not just all governments have been, silly enough to just print money to try to throw money at a problem to make it go away. So we're still the gold standard of currencies in the world. We've been hearing for decades that the dollar is going to be replaced, but it's not. So.
Not with a digital currency?
No. You're going to put all your assets in Bitcoin? I don't think you are.
No, but they're talking about the government actually issuing digital currency, which would collapse all of those others.
Well, anything that's backed by full faith and credit in the United States should hold some degree of value. But ask Eric Adams how well cryptocurrencies do if you get paid in them, because he just lost 10% of his first paycheck.
That's right.
So anything more on your end of year report? In conclusion, I mean, I'm feeling pretty good about the next 3, 4, 5 years. I'm feeling pretty good about holding real estate as a hard asset in inflationary times. Feeling pretty good that you could do well, not just in Manhattan, but in Morningside Heights or Brooklyn or even Gowanus has opportunities. So, how do we take us out?
I think, back on what Greg said, if we're looking at inflation, then real estate's a good place to put your money. If you're looking at Manhattan, every time we build a building, there's less available land to build another building, right? So, it's a limited quantity. And all this discussion, by the way, about converting office buildings to residential is a bunch of BS. It doesn't work, okay? If it worked, it would have been done a long time ago. Mechanical systems are different. The floor plates are too deep. The glazing is different. Oh, we didn't even get into all the changes in building code that are coming down the road that are going to increase developer costs, which is going to increase the price of apartments as well. We could do that in the next segment. But you know what, John? I think, all things being equal, I would never bet against New York. It's kind of like betting against Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. The Giants got the best of him, but 7 other teams didn't. So my feeling is, New York will continue to reinvent itself. I'm hoping that we have a mayor now that understands that you have to balance well the needs of all and not just the needs of few. I think we have a governor who also understands that and will work better with our mayor, which will be a good thing. And I think, you know, I think the future of New York is going to be very bright. And I do believe people are going to come back to the office. Okay. I do not believe people are going to stay home. They might stay home 1 day a week. You may end up with a 4-day in office and 1 day at home work week. But I believe people want to get out of their houses. They want to go back to work. They want to see an active city. I was out for dinner last night with Sarah Rotter for her birthday, and the restaurant was hopping. People were happy. People were laughing. You know, no one sneezed and ran out of the room. And listen, everyone knows I've been very, very vigilant about COVID. But I think we're seeing the end of, you know, I think there's light at the end of the tunnel here. And I'm really cautiously optimistic. And I'm hoping, you know, that Greg, much like many weathermen, is only right half the time.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Steve said. And I think it's such an exciting time in new development, you know, seeing the city and the landscape of the city and neighborhoods emerge over the last decade or so, you know, has been so fulfilling, and we're seeing even more of it now. And, you know, our team specifically has some really exciting projects coming up this quarter that we're launching, you know, and all over the city. And I think it's a really exciting time for the market, and it's a great time, especially for new development, as we see shifts in, you know, the typical unit types that are being built, shifts in design, shifts in amenities. And, you know, it's great to be a part of it. And I think we're only going to see more positive changes to adapt to this new lifestyle that we're in, and you know, having people come back to New York in such a thriving way.
Roberto, any final thoughts?
I'm very optimistic. We've just kind of reviewed exactly what I feel. The next 3 to 5 years are going to be a nice, methodical run. And if you get in now, you know, you have it, prices have come down, you know, from where we were once. So you missed the bottom, but you haven't missed the recovery. And it's an amazing time to get in. So.
All right. Well, I think this was a great show. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Roberto.
Yes.
Thank you, Scott Hobbs. Thank you, Greg Heim, wherever you are. I think I heard a subway in the background. Next week, we have the candidate for governor in Connecticut. And I want to ask him about how his ideas are going to affect the real estate market, frankly. Because some of the feedback I've already gotten that Bob Stefanowski is going to be on this show is they said, so what? All those guys are the same anyway. All those politicians, you know, they don't make a difference. Well, I want to give him a chance to tell me how come his policies are going to make for a business-friendly environment here in Connecticut, and how are they going to be transportation-friendly for my commuters, and how are they going to be tax-friendly for my residents? So I want to know how Connecticut is going to look from one of the guys who's studying the problem. So it's going to be a great show, and I hope you'll all join us next week for Bob Stefanowski.
That sounds
Thank
really
you all.
amazing. Thank you so much,
guys. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thanks
Cheers.
so much. Cheers.
Skipper.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.